Hi, my name is Igor Garlatov. I'm the host of the Health Tech Crew podcast. The following episode features a conversation with Tina Galloway, an advisory board member for Kepler team. Tina is a recognized enterprise strategy and growth leader with a lot of experience in fostering partnerships and driving growth for major health plan clients. In acknowledgement of her expertise and knowledge, she was honored with 2021 ACHE Award and has been invited to speak at a number of industry events. These include Optum Forum, EY Innovation Lab, Black Professionals Network, and Health Tech Women. In this episode, we talk about B2B sales in healthcare, tapping into Tina's remarkable experience and knowledge. Thank you so much for joining me on the Health Tech Crew podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.
So I have a bunch of questions for you, and I want to ask about your professional journey and how you got into healthcare sales, because I know you have a psychology background. So I'm curious how you ended up in healthcare sales.
Yeah. So I kind of started out in my career in sales. After I came out of college, I was an intern, and my first internship was in sales. And that's where I got the first experience of sales. I didn't stay in sales after that. I did it for a time as an intern, first in financial services, then in healthcare. So I had healthcare and financial services internship experience in the sales organization. And at that point in time, I watched what the sales teams and the sales leaders did. And I just filed that away in my brain. And then I continued, then I went into my career. I spent time doing technology, program project management and consulting. And also that's when I decided, as I was doing that and I got into healthcare, I wanted to get deeper into healthcare and understand. I was more focused on, or I was thinking more about the way that people interact with the healthcare system. And that's what sent me to study psychology. So I wanted to understand the dynamics of how people interact, how they interact with their physicians, how they interact with the healthcare system, how they interact with the world. And as I did that, I also saw the connection to, okay, if you understand people and you understand how people connect with the world, then you also can understand how people buy, how they interact with, an organization, a company, the healthcare system, how they consume, how they are consumers of healthcare. And you understand that a little better. So that's it is a translatable skill. And so that's where I put those all together into what I guess is a career.
Now, this is awesome. And you mentioned some people you looked at and also some theoretical knowledge you acquired. Could you share if you a specific person who's been particularly influential and maybe a specific insight from psychology that is helping you every day?
Yeah. So early in my career, I worked for a sales leader. Actually, when I was interning, this person, she was one of the sales leaders. She ran a market. It was in the Medicare Advantage space. And at that point in time, I was fairly young and I didn't have a concept of what that really meant as far as the impact that it had in the healthcare system and, even who the consumer was. However, I did understand that, and I did understand that the work that was being done was important. And one of the things that she would say back to us interns is that we had an important place that we had an important place in society. And although we were a component of the healthcare system, the component that the piece that the place that we filled in the system was important. And for us to understand the business, understand the business. If you understand the business, if you understand the industry, then you could find where you belong in the industry. And she was really intentional about that, her place and where she was, and us doing the same type of understanding. And at that point in time, it was really hard to wrap my head around. There's so much, in the healthcare space. And it was really hard for me to understand how something you learn in school then translates to the real world, and then not to feel like a cog in the wheel or just to feel like a component of something, but to understand the bigger picture. But I always kept that with me. And maybe that's just the way that my mind works, but I try to look at the big picture, look at everything at a macro level, and then drill down into it. And I feel like that advice that she gave me has helped me throughout my career to be able to figure out where my place is, and then how I can create value. And then also to be able to see the bigger ecosystem that we're in and how that also impacts the overall everyone. And I think, and that also ties back into my psychology background, because I think because I see it that way, I'm able to also be able to figure out the drivers, what is driving people. Because one of the main things that I usually typically ask or try to find out is what's important to the person. What is most important to this organization? What's most important to that person? And then understanding how I can add value or what my place is in that, but then also what their place is in the entire ecosystem. And that helps to create this opportunity to share information, share value, and in sales, share, whatever the product, solution, whatever we're trying to do for our customers.
It sounds like a very simple piece of advice to ask people what's important. Is it as straightforward as it sounds, or there is more to it?
There's more to it. It's yes, a lot more. But when you have that, if you have that as like your the undercurrent of how you operate and think, then every interaction and interactions can be very transactional. So, you may have an opportunity to meet with people, to talk with people. And if you take an approach that it is transactional, then you may have, a set of questions that you ask. And this is where the hard part comes in. If you are making it transactional and then you just start rattling off questions, and then the other person doesn't respond to you in the way that, or doesn't give you the information, then you think this is a loss or we haven't accomplished anything. However, if you are not thinking of it as transactional, but it's really just the way you operate, then, or the way you see things, then it's an exchange of information, or you're just trying to get to know someone, you're taking this time to connect with them. And so that's not something that happens, and or it may not happen one time. It may be a series of conversations that you have with a person. It may be a series of things that you have to do to extract that, but it shouldn't be a transactional thing. It should be really about connecting. And if you have that as your foundation, then you should be able to get that information. Some people are harder than others, so not saying that, that's an easy, for every person, that's an easy thing to do. But I also believe in habits. So I believe that once something that you make a habit, then it just becomes instinctive. It's muscle memory. It's just the way that you communicate with people. It's the way you interact with people.
Very cool. And it sounds like universal advice for business-to-business sales. Mm-hmm. I wanted to follow up and ask, do you see any peculiarities, or could you talk to any peculiarities that relate specifically to B2B sales and healthcare?
Yeah. So healthcare is complex. And going back to that, to what I said about understanding the industry, I think that the most successful healthcare sales organizations, people, individuals, are those that understand the industry. And an example of that is that if you're a health system, you have a specific way of generating revenue. And if you're a health insurance company, you have a specific way of generating revenue. If you're a pharma company, you have a specific way. And often those are at odds. So understanding that is really important, because if you are, it's not always the same exact messaging. You may have a similar, you may have a product and it may fit in multiple spaces, but the messaging may be off because the constituent, the stakeholder, how they're trying to capture revenue or what their goals are in conflict with the way you see the industry. So that's one of the main things that I've learned as far as healthcare is really understanding that piece of it, so that I can tailor my messaging to, or it's sometimes it means tailoring the product, the solution. It's not just the messaging, to the needs of that particular stakeholder or in that organization, and recognizing that although some things seem like they should be intuitive, or we all want the best for the patient, we absolutely do, but this organization goal is different than the goal of another organization, and making sure that that's everybody in the organization understands that.
So I wanted to follow up on this tailoring of messaging or even the product to the needs of a specific group of buyers in healthcare. For example, providers. How would you tailor your message or your product to them?
Yeah, good question. So there is a health systems a few years back started to invest in these facilities, ambulatory surgical facilities. And they're offshoots of the hospital where they do acute care procedures, outpatient procedures. They're usually higher dollar procedures. It's a great investment for, there's a need, the health systems look for where are the needs of my patients in the area. And also, if I'm going to invest all of this, I mean, medical equipment, physicians, research, all of that is very expensive. So if I'm going to invest, I'm going to invest in something that is going to be a revenue generator. So these are high dollar revenue generating activities. And so they did a lot of investment there. But because they're high dollar revenue generating activities, on the payer side, the payers look at that and they quickly adapt. So what happens is they see all of these charges coming in, they realize that this is happening, and so they start to adapt programs and things to be able to shift. How do we shift people from going to those facilities? So this is a counter, two different strategies. And then what happens is that if you are trying to talk to a health system or a payer about electronic data exchange or, connectivity, what you have to realize if you're selling that value prop is that when you go to the health system and you say, we want to connect you to the payer, and you say to the payer, I want to connect you to the health system, and they are misaligned on what that means. They both want to be connected. They want the technology, they want to take advantage of that. However, if you say to the health system, we want to connect you to the payer, and the health system sees that as the payer just wants to connect to me to be able to shift membership away from my revenue generating base, and the payer is looking at it and saying, I want to shift revenue. That's my main reason. I'm saying that it's something, but in general, I want to shift my revenue away from, then you might find the health system giving you pushback in doing it. Although you've got this great product, you've got this technology, and it's not that they're not trying to work with you. It's that you have to assure them these are the goals. These are the guardrails that are going to be put up. This is where there's some kind of contractual skin in the game for the payer versus us, and vice versa. We're going to partner. We're going to work together. If you don't have that messaging, you may end up trying to sell to someone. And these are experiences that I've had. Try to sell great products that just don't sell, and you're not understanding why. and then you look back and you figure out after you've done some research and you've looked at all the data that the messaging is misaligned, and that with some tweaks, maybe now we can all talk, but we have to understand that this stakeholder has one goal, this stakeholder has another, and where, as a salesperson, can we try to meet in the middle, satisfy both, and then maybe we can sell our product.
I love that example. So essentially, in the messaging, if I got it correctly, you need to explain that not all information will be shared.
Exactly. And that's a trust transaction. So that's a trust that has to be built. So that's also a part of the psychology of understanding people when you're in a sales situation, is understanding that you need to establish trust with each of the parties, and then you also need to ask those questions to be able to find that out. Because in most of the situations where I learn these things, it's by asking the questions. It's not necessarily something that I could find in a book, or that is easily, that people easily tell you about what may be some of the friction in the system that's causing things not to move forward. So asking those questions, getting engaged, really getting in there and just being very, very curious with people about, what's going on? How is this working? How do things work? Has helped me to be able to start to put the dots together and figure out, oh, okay, that's the reason why we're having this trouble. It's not our product. It's not, it's the fact that we don't understand what they need, and we haven't established that trust.
I love that specific example. It's very visual and easy to see. And I understand where you're coming from in terms of asking questions, building relationships. But these are long-term strategies. They take time, experience. Are there any hacks or strategies that could be more called tactics in B2B healthcare sales that can get you fast results?
Yes. So technology has made buyers very, very savvy. Most buyers can look and do research and do a lot of research, especially if they identify a need. There's a difference between them identifying a need and them not knowing that they have a need and you bring it to them. But let's say in the space of they've identified a need, or they know that they need something, technology has allowed us to put a lot of content out there, to be able to put messaging out there, to establish ourselves as thought leaders, or just knowledge, a repository of knowledge that customers can come to. And I find that although to give and to share information does take effort, it does take work, it's not the type of maybe difficult, arduous sales cycle that a lot of these B2B sales that take a long time may need. Because if you're establishing this trust by being that repository of knowledge, if you're establishing this trust by being the place that someone clicks on to go to get information, then you're jumping ahead in that interaction. When someone needs something, now they know who to go to. And I think that is the type of shorter term wins that an organization can have, because when people then are using you in that way, then those conversations happen. And then if you've already established this trust, or you already established yourself as a thought leader, then you give yourself the authority, or you give yourself the permission. They've given you the permission to ask the question. And sometimes the simplest question, what do you need? I do it. We can do it. What do you need right now? We can make that happen. So I definitely think technology is a big help. I think there's a lot of ways to connect with people and to find out their needs. We've gotten back into conferences. We've gotten back into meeting and networking and getting together. And sometimes it's just that direct question of, what do you need? How can I help? How can I make a connection for you? that opens up those doors. And when somebody tells you what they need, then I always think of it as then, well, how do I fill that need? Is it in my wheelhouse to fill it? Then I'm going to do that. I'm going to, and then those small things build and build and build. And hopefully over time, then you get to that part where you get the big sale. But you filled this need here, you filled that need here, and it just continues to grow and establish. And then, of course, word of mouth, because once you do that with one person, they're going to talk about you with somebody else.
To me, that's like a continuation, and I love how you simplify this. Ask people what's important to them. But before you can ask them, you need to do this thing in terms of building your brand, your personal brand, a company brand. And it's a noisy space. There are a lot of people trying to do exactly that. So are there any bits of wisdom you could share that work particularly well in healthcare?
Yes. So it is very noisy, and sometimes. So what I've found is market segmentation is one way to look at. So looking at the market that you're trying to target, and an exercise that I do and our teams have done a lot of is looking at, here's our capabilities. This is what we're good at, and here are our strengths. And then looking at your target audience and your market and who you can target. And you can't target everybody. And it doesn't make sense to target everybody. And, you could be very sophisticated in how you tier potential customers, or you can be, very basic in how you do it. But, sometimes even the most basic, I've found that some people have the intuition to take and figure that out, even with the most basic, not a complicated algorithm of modeling to be able to do that. But basically, then once you tier your market, determining where your sweet spot is in that, and then targeting towards that sweet spot. So for an example of that is that if I spend a lot of time in the health payer space, and there's maybe about, in the US, there's maybe about 200 health payers across the nationally. About 80 of them, 75 to 80, are the larger organizations. And then the organizations that everybody knows their name are probably like 10. So you've got 10, everybody knows their name, they're the big players, that's who everybody's targeting, they've got deep pockets and they're huge organizations. And then you've got about 50 that are like regional players, but they've got investment money and they're strong in their area. And then you've got the rest. And the rest are typically like niche players. However, if you're looking at the market, and let's say for example, you're a startup, and you're trying to target, who do I get in with? Who do I focus on? It's really hard, to your point, to get the big players to pay you attention. It's probably maybe only a certain percentage, less hard, difficult to get the next group. But there's 100 and something smaller organizations that don't have the big pockets. However, they have niche needs and they tend to sometimes be forgotten. But that may be where your sweet spot is. And so what I've advised or told other organizations especially startups, as they've talked about what some of their solutions are, is, look really deeply at this market, and also don't necessarily be so swayed by these big names. I know that the big name means something, and it's important, and you'll get there. However, there may be a audience for you that may be very lucrative for you to build to that's in a smaller space that you need to focus on.
Thank you for sharing those insights for startups and like organizations that are getting started with the product. Could you talk a little bit about building a customer pipeline in B2B healthcare sales?
Yes. And that could be pretty difficult as when you're getting started. I think after time it becomes easier and easier, especially when some of the things we talked about, when you've laid the foundation, you have your brand established, you have your knowledge repository established, you're getting out there, you're getting recognition in the space, and those are all part of building a pipeline. So those are like the foundational pieces of building the pipeline. But then those seem to, I think over time, those start to become, easier and easier to do. It's harder in the beginning, and then it gets easier over time. And then that should become like a well-oiled machine. And technology makes that possible for that over time to be that way. And then as you're doing more, and we talked about market segmentation, as you're doing market segmentation, some of the other things that go into looking at market segmentation and also building out pipeline is that you have your main market that you're targeting, and you have your main suite of what I like to call like the sweet spot for solutions, or the things that you're going to be able to go out there and sell right away. But then as you should be also developing or looking at the market to see what's coming. And as a part of as you're developing the pipeline and you're having the conversations, is that you're putting out information and you're helping people and you're having conversations about what's happening right now, but you're also having conversations about and vetting your ideas for what you're going to be putting out in the future. So it creates this continual pipeline of information sharing with your potential customer, but then also a continual pipeline of, hey, I've got something new to talk to you about. So you establish the line of communication to do that. And then as you're looking at your market, you're saying, okay, well, this market here, this is where the direction of the market is going. And so if I take a step back from that, this is what I have right now, but 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, I need to have something new to talk to them about. And then that continues and they'll be changing too. So it's like a constant interchange. But then also as a part of that market segmentation is that there may be markets that you're not targeting right now. So it's also this, how will we get into these other markets? Or how will we create a market? And that's the ideal situation, right? The ideal situation is, like, I think is for most people to say, most organizations to say, I'm going to create a market that nobody else is in. Easier said than done, right? But it happens. But how is this, we're in this market. So let's say you're focusing on smaller health plans. You're doing, you're doing a certain work with those health plans. You're growing that business. You're continuing to have conversations, and in those conversations, you're extracting information from them. And from that, you're extracting information to continue to build a pipeline, because they're telling you what is needed. But then you can also look at, hey, this is the profile of this organization. This organization also matches to all these other organizations. Now, all the organizations are not exactly the same, so I'm not saying it's like exactly, one for one, but if they're in a niche market, it's similar. And they also have to keep up with, there's this thing of everybody, business is if you're a for-profit business, you're in a competitive environment. You have to keep up. If not, you just won't, you won't survive. So if everybody else is doing something, then these other organizations are going to do it, right? They may not be the ones that come in the beginning, but they're going to do it. So then that becomes your target, because you're looking at, I'm working really good with this organization. I'm doing a lot of great work for them. I've got all these other organizations that now I need to also continue to try to get in front of. And that's building your pipeline. And then you can also take that and say, okay, maybe I only focus on the smaller, but now I've got enough to have a conversation now with a mid-size or a regional player, because I've got enough information that now I can have that conversation. I can be valuable to them, and from there, and that's that continual pipeline building that I like to do. And I think that that's how you continue to have conversations. You're continually relevant in the market, and you always have something new to talk to your customers about.
Very cool. I love how, again, you're creating a bit of a foothold in a place where you can create it and then use it to expand. It's
Right.
almost like military
Exactly.
strategy.
Yes, exactly.
As you are an advisor for Kepler team, and we work with early stage startups, and for us, I'm really curious, you mentioned those areas. Where do you see particular opportunities right now? Where should startups, early stage companies or smaller companies focus their efforts? What are the blue oceans in healthcare right now?
Right. So, I mean, everybody's talking about AI, right? And the things AI is going to do, and I think that's an opportunity area, but more so, I feel that the baby boomers are going to create and are creating a need for senior care. So there's going to be so many baby boomers by a certain, and I don't have the statistics in front of me, but there's going to be so many baby boomers that are going to be in the healthcare system at a certain point in time in the next 5 to 10 years. It's going to outpace any number that's ever been, and they're going to come with a unique set of needs. But in addition to that, the millennials and Generation
X.
I think it's X, thank you. Generation X are going to be in a situation of being in the sandwich where they're going to have to care for the baby boomers and their children. And so they're going to need capabilities and ways to manage that. And so there's going to be, I think there's going to be a huge need to be able to focus on that demographic. And the current way that happens is not sustainable. So most people that deal in that situation, they know that is that's a hard place to be, is to have an aging parent, and not who is sick, and the emotional and the financial burden. But nursing homes are not the answer. And so I think that there's a huge opportunity there for people to relook at that model and to figure out a way to reinvent it on the health system side, as well as payers, as well as pharma, because management of their drugs, management of the spend of their drugs, all of that is a huge part of managing a senior. In addition to the fact that most seniors, all they want is to be autonomous. So, giving them that ability as well. So I think that's going to be a really big opportunity, and I'm probably not even scratching the surface on how that could be reimagined for a startup organization. But I think we're going to see some changes there.
And have you seen any organizations getting a head start?
So interestingly, CVS purchased a company called Signify Health for like $8 billion or something like that recently. And a lot of the large organizations are doing something. United is another example. They're vertically integrating, so they're basically buying health, not necessarily every part of a health system, but they're buying pieces of the health system, but they're also the health plan. And then they also control some piece of the drug, like CVS Health being, the biggest pharmacy in the nation. And so they're controlling that whole supply chain. And so now they purchased Signify Health, which is a senior care product. So now theoretically, they are attempting to control the whole, from the beginning to the end of a person's healthcare journey. And I think there's going to be more of that. And so that is going to, and they'll likely try to innovate on the concept of how you deliver senior care. And how you do all of that. They have the assets to do it. So I think that's an example of like the large organizations seeing that and adapting to it, and going in that direction, which I think is something that, entrepreneurs and startup founders should start to think about, not necessarily not replicating what they're doing, but more, why are they investing there? Why are they choosing to buy a company like Signify Health? Why are they choosing to buy a primary care like One Medical, like Amazon purchased One Medical? Why did Amazon decide to purchase One Medical? I think that's something that startup founders and entrepreneurs should think about, and then seeing where they're making their investments. And that is the places, not necessarily to replicate exactly what they're doing, but more so that's the focus areas for the future, where the money is going to be.
If you were to give advice to your younger self, starting out in B2B sales with a focus in healthcare industry, what would that advice be?
Definitely learn as much as you can, ask tons of questions, try to connect with those that have been in the industry for a while, and mostly to just understand it, not necessarily to be influenced by it, because I am a firm believer that, technology and change has come from people reimagining things and not doing it the status quo. So I think, you take it back to first principles thinking and dissect and take it apart. However, you do have to understand what it is. So asking those questions, finding out what it is, what is this and how did it get here? And then being very creative in taking it apart, like asking those hard questions. Why? Does that really have to be that way? And who do I need to talk to try to understand maybe where there's an opportunity to make a change?
Everything we talked about, it sounds like there is a process in place, and processes take time, and usually you learn through failures when things don't work out. So how do we deal with setbacks that are bound to occur when we're starting out?
Right. When I was younger, I always thought that, you were supposed to do things perfectly. And that if you didn't do things perfectly, if you asked a question that wasn't right, maybe something that someone considered to be a dumb question, or you didn't have everything together, or you were still learning, that something was wrong with, your process. However, what I've learned is most of the things that really were game changers for me are things that I learned from trial and error, making the mistake or stumbling into something, asking questions and getting answers, and then the light bulb goes off. So I think now that the process of learning is about failure at times. And so you're going to fail. If you're always doing everything 100% right, you're probably not taking any chances. And that means that there's likely a lot of opportunities that you're missing out on. So now I feel that asking questions, having the courage to ask those questions, even at times looking silly, but those questions generate answers that hopefully will create a learning opportunity. And that's the place that you want to be in. And over time, you'll get better at accepting the fact that, hey, I've made a mistake or that failed. But then you also recover very quickly over time because you realize, hey, that didn't work. No problem. Now on to the next thing. I'm going to recover, move on, take what I learned from that. And that's going to create the other opportunity. And eventually that does end up in usually being success.
Thank you so much, Tina.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
Thank you all for tuning into today's episode on B2B Sales Strategies with Tina Galloway. As we wrap up, I'd like to shine a spotlight on the driving force behind this podcast, Kepler team. Kepler team is a custom software development agency that is dedicated into breathing life into new products, streamlining integration of existing systems, and meeting unique needs of healthcare innovators when it comes to scaling their solutions. So if you're looking for an engineering team, Kepler would be an exemplar choice. Until the next episode, continue to innovate and stay tuned.